Evolution MX is accessible via a browser. It can be hosted on premise on your own server or can be offered as a hosted option. It is license enabled, which means that you can have it as scalable as you need it to be. So it could operate over a number of different companies within your organization. It could be for any number of users that you wish on the system. And you can control which individual users get into which function. It's also modular licensed as well. So down the left-hand side, you can see all of the potential modules that are available to Evolution MX. We've highlighted for you in solid orange what we refer to as the core system. So from contract through to cash book will be a starting point. Everybody gets all 7 of those out of the box as standard offerings. It's then up to you to decide how they're going to be configured for use within the system. The hollow icons represent those options which are optional. So it's up to you whether you include them either initially during implementation of Evolution MX or whether they may be considered to be added on. And they cover the likes of things like document management to keep copies of all documents that are generated by the system, as well as allowing you to drag and drop new documents in against a contract or against a supplier or against an employee, as well as the ability to do things like procurement through purchase ordering for suppliers, materials, subcontractors, and also plant. The purpose of today's session is to give you an overall view and concentrate on how you look at project information on the system. There are a number of on-demand videos which are available for you to look at any particular modules, so things like purchase ordering, document management, subcontractor control, and so forth. And we'll be happy to share those links with you should you have a particular interest in those areas. So modular access is available through the menu, as we say, and I mentioned earlier, you can restrict access so people can only get into the particular options that you want them to see or that are relevant to their particular function. Also, within the system, you've got the ability to use dashboards, and dashboards are a great way of bringing the system to life, if you like, and having them make available to the reader the information that is relevant to them, that they want to be able to see as a snapshot. So these are fully configurable. They may be modular specific. I'm happening to look here at one that's looking at my creditors side of things, for example. Each of the individual tiles are configured to give you the information that you want, whether it is in just a summary set of figures or whether it's a graphical representation. They can be set to auto refresh, as mine are doing every 10 seconds, just so you make sure you've got bang up to date information. And they also allow you to drill down into information beneath. So if you wanted to, you could go into your creditors in more detail to be able to expand upon and see information relating to the postings that have been made against that particular supplier, and even be able to quickly and easily retrieve documentary evidence, such as an invoice that's been received through email and processed either manually on the system or using OCR, optical character recognition, to suggest automatic population of the data for it. Now, we're not limiting modules, any dashboards to a particular module. They are available throughout the system, so you could be using them for your subcontractors as well. Things like insurance due for your different subcontractors, so that you're not run the risk of falling foul to perhaps somebody who's got insurance that's expired, so you can get ahead of the game and be proactive and make reminders to them. You can also use the dashboards through the contract side, which is obviously our focus for today. That might be that you want to have a look at an overall view of all of your contracts. Now, you could filter this so you're only looking at particular contracts of a particular nature, or contracts that are due to finish within the next 6 months, or have only just started, or are over an expected contract sum of 100,000 or whatever it might be. But it's a great way of being able to give summarized information without having to run hefty reports. And that could include just simple information that's telling you that overall you've got 23 retentions that you maybe need to be taken care of. If you click on that tile, it will take you into more detail, showing you your contract numbers and the summary retention values against each, allowing you to expand into what could show you more than one retention. Okay, so we'll come back to dashboards in a second. I just wanted to delve into more detail now on a particular project. So using traditional means, if you like, to be able to locate information about a specific contract. So we're able to here select the contract that we want. We can either input it or we can browse to be able to search for and find the contract that we want. And a contract number is anything you want it to be. It could be numbers, it could be letters, it could be an abbreviation of the customer or the site name or the type of work that you're doing. It could also be split into, as I've got here, a hierarchy representing a main contract and what we call sub-jobs beneath it. Now, each of these sub-jobs is seen by the system as a job in its own right, so it's got its own costs, its own budgets, its own profitability, but its figures are rolled up to the top. So 1002 will collect information from all of the sub-jobs beneath. It's up to you whether you use that functionality at all, or as I'm doing, you can see I'm just using it on a couple of occasions. To help you locate your contract, you can either just select it from the list, or you can use your search options here, which allow you to search on any column of information that's been shown. So it could be looking at the address of the contract, the QS that's involved, the customer, anything at all that you want to help you locate the job. So I'll just call up a job. A summary view is then shown of that particular project. So real time and up to date is going to be information about this particular project. The left-hand side of the screen is all about cost and budget information. The right-hand side is all about sales, revenue, profit, retention, and so forth. So what we're seeing on the left-hand side is a summary of my costs, overall 34,500, broken down into cost head groups. Now, these will be of your choosing. So the ones that I've got shown aren't the ones you necessarily have to use. They don't have to be labeled like that. They don't only have to be 5 of them. You can choose to have as many as you want. So I'm seeing a summary cost per cost head group, alongside which I've got a budget. Now, a budget is something that you could enter manually into the contract if you wanted to, or more likely, you're going to want to be able to import that. So we can easily exercise an import routine, which reads an Excel file or a CSV file that maybe started life in Excel, or maybe began life in a leading estimating system, such as Conquest, BuildSoft, Causeway, whatever it might be. So we can easily formulate an import so that we can make the transition from your estimating side into your budgets that much more seamless. So the budget figures I'm seeing here, 72,500 alongside the 34,000 worth of cost. My budget is one of what could be several. So on the top bar there, I've got original estimate is the budget heading I'm choosing to use at the moment, but you can see I've already got 3 others. So if I clicked on latest budget, we'd be able to see an up-to-date view of the budget. I haven't lost sight of the original because that's still protected under my heading original estimate, but the latest budget is also available. And you can import or input as many different budgets as you want. You're not limited to 4. You can have 444 if you want to, reflecting change in prices and rates, or maybe major variations that you've got, or just timely updates. So you choose how you're going to manage the budgets, and they can then provide you with important inquiry information as well as reporting, as I'll come on to later on. So at a summary level, you've got that information, but you can also delve into more detail. So if I go to my costs tab towards the top of the screen, I could expand upon the materials, for example, and it's up to you whether you do go any further than just a materials heading or not. I've chosen to go into more granular detail. So my codes that are in brackets represent the description that you'll see. So we're able here to see how the materials cost and budget has been broken down. And you'll notice I've got a column there for actual cost and budget. And you can control which columns are actually shown and in what order. Using your right click there, you've got the modify current view, where you can pick and choose which fields of data you have and in what order they are shown. So on my summary here, I've got a view here of my patio doors, for example, £1,200 worth of cost, alongside which there's a budget of 306. So it's interesting that, because overall it looked like your materials was okay, 10,500 worth of cost versus a budget of 14.5. So it looked like we were within budget. But because this ability to record on a granular level, we can see that actually alarm bells ought to start to ring in particular areas. We've gone over budget on the particular aspect of materials. Now, if you wanted to inquire further on that particular element, then you can just double click on the line and it will show you all of the cost implications related to that particular cost head. So we've got purchases from suppliers, subcontractors, any journals, anything at all that's been made as a cost entry into the system. And that could allow you to drill further if you wanted to, and retrieve full information about the posting, drill down into the source, where you can see not only the figure work, but also retrieve the document, which would give rise to any image. Okay, so this could have been an invoice that was captured, as I mentioned earlier, through the emailing system. You've processed it on screen or had it processed by the system, and it's retrieved and it's retained a documentary evidence of that particular posting. So that's looking at a particular area of interest. If you were more generally interested in seeing all of your costs, whether it's materials or not, then just higher up the hierarchy you are when you double click, the more information you'll see. So if I go to the job description there and double click, we're now seeing all costs for all aspects of cost, whether it's plant, labor, material, subcontractors. Again, this screen is configurable, so you can have the columns that you choose to show. And from here, you've got the ability to drill into information beneath. So if you were drilling into a subcontractor payment, for example, drilling down to the source from here will allow you to see, again, the figure work behind the particular posting, but will also retrieve for you the document. This particular document was generated by Evolution MX during the payment processing to this particular subcontractor. It's typical of the kind of documents that Evolution MX can generate, but it's not set in stone. We're not saying this is what your payment certificate has to look like. You'd certainly probably want your company logo emblazoned, maybe top left, maybe top right, whatever you choose to on the system. But we can also fine tune it to make sure it's representative of what you want to send out to your, in this case, subcontractors. But that goes also for sales invoices, pay slips, purchase orders, and other kinds of documents. Okay, the information that we've got on screen then, not only is it drillable into more detail, but it's also exportable. So the information you're seeing now, if you just use the right click within the body of the data and use the copy to Excel option, it will do just that. It will take the information as it's being shown on screen and take it out into a readily formatted Excel file. Perfect to be able doesn't have access to Evolution MX or needs it on a more timely basis because they don't have access at that particular time. That is then ready to go information. It's separated now from Evolution MX, but it's up to them how they use it going forward. You'll notice the formatting takes care of things like dates and values. It even recognizes that a contract may begin with a 0, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a number. It's going to recognize that as a text field. So that's ready to go, share information for the preparation of maybe valuations, applications to clients. Okay, so back to our main screen. The summary then is showing the cost versus budget, as we've just explored. You've also got other options here. So my budget is the principal way of displaying the information. But if I chose to, I could look at total. What that's going to do for the time being is it's going to remove the budget figure and replace it with a committed cost. Now that's committed cost in terms of purchase orders that are on Evolution MX that have yet to be delivered or invoiced. So in other words, there are additional costs that need to be considered. In total, we've got 5,700, 3 grand of which is on the subcontractors, the remainder is on the materials. So going forward, we need to be thinking about this contract overall as 40,000's worth of costs rather than the 34 grand's of actual costs. So you've got that valuable insight into future costs that are heading their way towards that contract. That is dependent, of course, upon you having the purchase orders module of Evolution MX, which we can look at as a separate exercise if you're interested. Now, the information on those purchase orders is available in more detail. Down towards the bottom, I've got an orders button. So if I click on that, that will display for me a summary of all of the purchase orders that are raised and held against that particular contract within the system, showing you that whether they're materials or subcontractors, my prefix there of MA or SC is indicating that, as opposed to PH, which could be plant hire. So you can get third-party plant hire purchase orders recognized in the system as well. On any one of those purchase orders, you've got the ability to drill into more. See, 385 of the order on that particular purchase order, none of which has been delivered or invoiced, so it's completely outstanding. If I double click, I can get an idea of the content of that purchase order, showing me the lines and their individual status. So if you'd had a partial receipt or invoice, that would be reflected within the data here. But I've also got access to the document, which is a retrieval of the purchase order image. Okay, a couple of versions there, I've done a couple of revisions on it, but I could see the detail on it, which would show the purchase order as it was sent to your supplier, probably via email, but the system has retained that as an image. And the reason I've got 2 of them there, just out of interest, is because I did do a revision on it. So I may have added or changed something on the purchase order. It's then sent a new version to the supplier and retained not only the. Okay, so that's our purchase order information. That, again, information could be taken externally. So you've got a grid. So if you want to copy that out to Excel, that's perfectly acceptable and available to you. Back to our summary screen, the other option you've got there is for a cash position view. And that's quite valuable because that gives you an insight into how much the jobs cost you, but also how much you've actually paid out to it. So 34.5 grand in terms of cost, 22.5 of which has been paid out, meaning you're exposed, vulnerable or liable, if you like, to the tune of about 12 grand on that particular contract. That's because our system, being a fully joined up, fully integrated system, doesn't pass the job costing information over to a different account system that then makes the payment and doesn't tell the job it's been done. Because we're all in the same system, it now can tell you that you've made payments against the different costs and could even show you a detailed view of that. So rather than the view I looked at earlier, I do have an alternative view which could allow you to see the cash position, which means it's tracking individual transactions and saying these ones at the top, the first 5 or 6 have yet to be paid. the next ones have been paid, and that's the period in which they were paid. So it gives you that valuable tracking of what's outstanding and when you turn cash positive on a particular contract. Okay, it's back to our summary. We've got an alternative view on the left-hand side here for a contract cost view. I'm looking at cost heads, which is really the only relevant view for this particular contract. I'll just switch to another contract, give you an insight as to what you could do alternatively. So initially, this is the same as the first contract. We're just talking about bigger figures, so 341 grand overall on that through your different resource codes, your cost heads. Now, on this particular contract, I'm also saying I want to be able to track activity costing, or what we call operations. So what this will do, and it should become obvious what the idea behind it is, we're seeing now the same totals at the bottom, but this time it's based upon the operation that those costs relate to. Operations could be activities, they could be phases, they could be stages, they could be variations within the contract. So you may have all your normal contract costs against the top level and then introduce different variations if you want to keep everything within the same job, should that be your preference. That now means that the cost information is going to be available in that form. So these operation group descriptions are your choice. So whilst this is a house builder, that may not be relevant to you, but that can be set up to reflect however you need it to show. The roof, for example, I could expand upon that might consist of more than one sub-activity, beneath which I've got the ability to go back into my traditional resources. So I'm looking here now at materials of 6,800, but that's purely materials involved in the roof timbers element of the job. But that would allow me to expand down to the individual transactions beneath, should I wish to. So that's an option for you to consider. It can be used on whichever jobs you want, if indeed that's relevant at all. So you choose whether a job has operational coding associated with it or not. Obviously, it requires more input at source, which could start with something like a purchase order, but it does give you that valuable insight further down the line. Now, over on the right-hand side of the screen, this is reflecting how configurable our sales processing is within inside Evolution MX. It's not just a case of this is how you produce an invoice and this is the effect it has, or this is how you do an application. We have a configurable mechanism behind the screen. So you tell us how you want the transactions to affect. So an application, for example, could be something which updates your debtors and your turnover. It may not. It may just be a memorandum figure that exists against the contract, and it's not until you get the client certificate or you choose to do an invoice that the actual contract value gets updated. So based on the fact it is configurable, so is the view on the right-hand side. So this view is looking at a contract that is based on applications. So the top line is just a memorandum figure that you can record just to say the contract sum is likely to be 100 grand overall, and keeping a track as to what you've done in terms of sales so far. So the application sum value is 1,500, none of which has been certified. So I'm choosing the terminology certified there. It might be that's the valuation figure or that's the invoice figure. So there's no right or wrong way of doing it, and there's no hard and fast ruling that says every particular contract looks at applications. But if I skip through my database, we can see that the next contract is much more straightforward. There's no applications or valuations involved. It's purely based upon invoices, perhaps with retention, discount, and so forth, but a much more straightforward view. So that just reflects how you've decided to record sales on that particular contract. Okay, now that information could be available through the inquiries I've seen. So I've gone into some depth there showing you how all the information could be accessible. But you could also introduce the idea of dashboards if you wanted to on an individual contract basis. So we saw how we had the dashboard, which was looking at all contracts overall. That could be something that you choose to filter. So in the top right-hand corner, I've got an option there to be able to select the contract that I specifically want to see. So from my list of contracts, I could say, let's have a look at it and how it affects contract 0737. So what the system will now do is it will redraw that dashboard, but filter the information based upon contract 0737. This could be your preferred way of looking at that same information that I've just had a look at through contract inquiry, because this could be configured to only include the areas that you're particularly interested in. From here, you could drill down into more detail. So from my grid of figures reflecting the cost head summaries, if I click on that, that will take me down into more information that I could then expand upon in the same sort of way that you saw me work through the contract inquiry. But that also allows for the summary information to be shown as you wish, and expand upon to show you those all-important documentary evidences beneath. Also, as part of the contract dashboard, you might have access to the contract documents. These were available through the contract inquiry, but thought I'd choose to show you them from here. So what we're seeing here is a complete library of all documents related to that particular contract. This could include all payment certificates raised for whichever subcontractors on whatever time period, a full library of all of those, all the purchase orders that are being created and raised against that particular contract. They're all available at that point as well. But the document management element of Evolution MX means you're not just limited to the system generated documents that are stored against the contract. That could extend to anything else that you want. So it could include the invoices that are received via email, for example. So those have automatically been filed against the contract based upon them coming in and being dealt with as an email image. As well as that, you've got more random or ad hoc files that you could choose to introduce. So it could be a repository for storing things like document photographs. And basically available to you through document management is anything that's an electronic file. So whether it's a JPEG or a bitmap or a PDF file, an Excel file, a Word document, anything at all can be stored into whatever folder structure you choose. So I've chosen here to have photos, for example, as a section, but it's up to me what those sections are. And in fact, I can introduce documents to the system. I'll just park that out of the way a bit for you. Go and grab a random PDF file I've got sitting on my desktop, bring it into the contract. You'll notice there's a chain around the screen there, allowing you to add that document now against the particular contract that we've got open. So it allows us to recognize that it's a PDF file. It's then saying, well, which section do you want to put it under? So this would be your choice of the headings that you saw in the background a few minutes ago. So if I just choose to put it under photos, for example, then that allows us to have that now added to the document library for that particular contract. So it no longer depends upon the file existing where it came from. It will now exist within inside Evolution MX, and it's freely available for you to be able to retrieve against that contract because it's been basically filed or tagged against that contract. Okay, there is scope also within the document management to expand further and record site forms. Now, those may be forms that you already create through whatever means that you have at the moment, through Word standalone or whatever, but there is a forms module available as well. So things like incident forms, risk assessments, method statements, site diaries, all sorts of things could be compiled using Evolution MX as a site user license. So mobile technology is enabled for that front. So on a tablet device, typically it could be an Android or an Apple iOS system, allows you to have the workers on site have a library of the templates that you want them to fill out. So they can compile the form based upon your templates, recording it against a contract and recording valuable information that you can then use either just as a document image, but also as reporting. So based upon all incidents that have been submitted through the incident forms, you'd be able to get an idea as to which sites had suffered most incidents and how much time had been lost and who was responsible and so forth. So that other webinars, if you're at all interested, we'll be happy to talk to you about that in more detail. Bringing information in, I've talked a little bit about the invoicing side of things. I just want to quickly show you how you would process an invoice coming into the system. Two options you've got here. We call entry level is where you are presented with a copy of the invoice as an email extraction, and then you choose how you're going to deal with it. That's called entry level. There's also OCR, which is a bit cleverer. That allows the system to intercept and say, okay, I recognize this invoice because it's come from VAT registration number X, and that compares against your database, and here's a suggested supplier, and it picks out the values and the fields as well for you. I've got a dashboard here, which is more of a processing oriented dashboard, which is telling me, for example, I've had 5 invoices that come into the designated email address. I can then use that to drill down to see a summary of each of those and get a thumbnail view of the individual image. So without having to print it, scan it, or file it, or barcode it, or anything like that, we can just call it up and have it represented to us on the left-hand side and allow for the right-hand side of the screen to be my input. So based upon what I'm seeing on the left-hand side, I can record against that invoice where I need it to go to. So it's going to be a Wolseley invoice. I'll just accept the default dates, put in a reference or two. Summary value, goods including VAT. Obviously, if it's Irish, there'll be different rates of VAT, and you'd have access to be able to split those between whatever codes were. The suppliers are just set up with a default rate that's been suggested to you. If you're using purchase ordering, then you can link to the purchase order. So we can browse here on the purchase orders that we've got outstanding for Wolseley. If I just want to go quickly to a purchase order that's been quoted on the invoice, I can do so. And that will then retrieve the purchase order lines that are effectively matched against that invoice. Now, if everything matches exactly to the purchase order, job done. Your to allocate figure that you're seeing over towards the right-hand side will be set to 0 because it matches exactly with what the purchase order is. In my case, I've deliberately left it with a discrepancy, probably something you're very familiar with. Somebody didn't think to quote purchase orders, delivery charges on a purchase order, so they weren't included, but the purchase invoices now come in with that. You've then got to deal with that discrepancy. It may be that you need to place it on query and throw it out to somebody else in your organization for them to answer the question as to why has that been missed. Is it okay to add it on, or should we challenge that to the supplier? Or you can use the option at the bottom here to add in a line. So without having to add it back to the purchase order, we're just going to analyze that difference and say it is against my contract 0737. It's in the cost head that I want to use for delivery charges, whatever that may be. And that will eradicate the difference. So I've now got 0 left to allocate. It might be you just want to scribble a quick note on there to say that the line was missed off a PO. If I then submit that, that's job done. So it'll be filed away. It'll be filed against the supplier, against the contract, and also the nominal ledger as well. So from an audit perspective, your auditors can get hold of all this documentary evidence that's going to be of importance to them. And that then is available to us to retrieve through the contract maybe, or through the dashboards. The dashboard here on the creditor side of things, if I just drill into my creditors graph, I'll be able to see the balance associated with Wolseley. Towards the bottom then, we're going to get the invoice I've just posted, given the invoice number, and the paperclip is an indication that there's an attachment, which in this case will be a copy of the invoice that you just saw on screen, together with a little sticky note that I threw on the top of it. Okay, so that's an insight into Invoice Register. As I say, OCR is available as a top-up, which will do most of that work for you, leave it left for you to verify before actually finally post off to the system, unless you're content with allowing for the system to do all of the work for you. And if everything balances, it'll just post it straight through to the system. So as well as dashboards, we've also got the ability to report upon the information within the system in the way that you want to. So I'll just bring you back to what we're calling analytics here. Style reporting, simply because it's up to you to decide how the report looks and what contains within it. So with an example here called contract performance, I'm now able to look at how all of my contracts are performing, including that top one we spent a lot of time looking at earlier. So we're now seeing a summary of that job and how much it's cost you versus how much it should have cost you based upon an original budget, as opposed to the current budget or a forecast. But you can have either or all of those showing as separate columns, because you basically pick and choose what you're going to have showing via selecting the ticks next to the fields that are listed down the left-hand side. So you can see it's fairly clear English as to what the fields represent. So there's no ambiguity really, or technical gobbledygook to fight your way through. You decide what fields you're having, and then you can also choose what position they're in. So if they don't put them in the position you want, you just drag and drop the column headings around to reposition them, and then you can save it in that format. You can also use conditional formatting to highlight any rules that you want to have in place. So I've got pale green is highlighting a rule that I'm using on comparison against the profit margin field, which itself is a calculated field. So you can put formula into these reports so that they are generated as additional data within the same report. So in the case of a profit margin being greater than 0, it's going to highlight it in green, indicating that green is the jobs that are making you money. Only 3 of them might be caused. Further down, I've got red indicating a job that's over budget. Orange is going to be a job that's nearly over budget. And you decide what those formatting rules are, and also maybe filter the jobs. So you're only including jobs that are current, for example, or only jobs that are over 100 grand, or whatever your criteria may be. But from here, you could, rather than having to go back to the contract inquiry or the dashboard, you could actually drill down into more information relating to that particular contract. So the 34 grand's worth of cost is now displayed as a breakdown through the cost head groups. Further than that, we can go down through our individual cost heads that I've chosen to group together. Don't have to, you can just show it all as individual cost entries without having to expand a further level. But also in there, you'll have access to the individual postings, including that posting that we just made a few minutes ago through the invoice register, matching against that purchase order. So that's available to you. The analytics or user-defined reporting is available not just on the contract ledger, it is throughout the system. And that's for you to be able to configure your system or system-defined reports, I should say. The other thing, just to show you, mentioned a bit about a mobile option that you've got. There is a mobile interface available. I'll just quickly show you the interface on this. But this is the subject of other demonstrations that we can do for you, allowing us to see we've got a mobile interface here, allowing you to log in on a different user license basis, and then have a menu of options available. So it might be that the mobile user is going to raise purchase orders, for example, or maybe as well as, or instead of that, just do goods received, taking pictures of delivery notes, so that saves the job of having to send the documents into the office and run the risk of them being lost and goodness knows what. But also the forms that I was talking about as well. So if you wanted them to be able to instigate an incident form or a risk assessment or a site diary to a form of your choosing, they could fire it up through here and have access to what you've decided to use as the form, with an ability to browse on the contract as it links it to it, fill in the form with the use of choices rather than expect them to fill in everything manually, allow for cameras to be activated, or to retrieve a file from the gallery that's on the device already. And that form then could just be stored, once it's submitted, could be stored against the contract, or it might go into workflow. So it might be that you need your health and safety rep to review all forms before they get shown as part of the document repository on the contract. But also, as I say, the information recorded on that form could be used for valuable reporting or analytics, as we've referred to it.